listening to Unfiltered with Muhammad Uncut, a podcast about personal growth and authentic leadership. If you're looking for tips on how to manage others, get ahead, and make your way up the corporate ladder, this is not the show for you. This podcast is about being of service to others, leading from the heart, and evolving into a better version of yourself. Each episode brings you motivated stories about unfiltered leadership and authentic leaders, those who involve others, use their influence to amplify diverse perspectives, and inspire teams to achieve collective results. If this sounds like you, keep listening. Hello and welcome to the Unfiltered Podcast, and welcome to my dear guest and friend, Pauline Crawford-Oomps. Thank you for being my unfiltered guest today.
I am absolutely delighted to be here and very excited.
And I'm very excited, and I get excited, and you can tell when I start recording each session because there's so much learning that I pass on from the guests, but there's so much learning that I absorb from the guests, and I look forward to that. As you probably know, Pauline, this podcast is all about transformation. It's a transformation of ourselves into the leaders that we want to be, so that we can lead others. And it's about involving, influencing, and inspiring others to become the better version of themselves. But we can only do that when we get there ourselves. And it's not a destination that we get to, but an ongoing path and process. And I thank you for being part of my path and process today.
And you for me as well. I think every single day, especially at the moment, it is such a huge learning curve. It's just momentous. It's an adventure every day.
I love it. It is true. And I think when you have that mindset that life and our ongoing journey of learning and self-discovery is an adventure, then we know that the adventure will come with some highs and lows, and we're prepared for whatever those highs and lows. And I know that you're going to share some of that, but I want to give my readers a bit of background on who Pauline is. So you work with businesses. You enable them to accelerate their growth by harnessing the power of men and women working together to achieve and deal with the real life chaos. We don't know what the word chaos means these days, do we, Pauline? That can damage performance and relationships at work. Pauline brings over 30 years experience consulting with corporate teams and career professionals across the United Kingdom, Europe, Asia Pacific, and now the US, teaching leaders and leading teams to work better, to work together seamlessly for the best results. She's a leadership expert, a change maker, and today she's my unfiltered guest. And that bio doesn't do you justice because I know that there's so much more that you do, but I'm going to ask you to share that with my listeners. So let's start there. Give me a bit of background about who you really are and what you do.
Who am I really? Oh, that's such a huge question, Mohammed. I am just a woman who believes in the goodness of people. And we do live in a chaos world. And forever, I have loved conversations. And so my magic is what I call magical conversations. And I remember as a child, which was in the UK, in London, in a very, that's a long time ago as well. So, it was in a very middle class, Catholic, conservative family, very happy. And we always had lots of tea parties, as we do in Britain. And one of the things I always observed was that conversations would flow or they would get stuck. And as a sort of 8-year-old, 10-year-old, 12-year-old, there was always one uncle who would stop the conversation because he would pontificate about something. And I remember thinking, oh, he's off again. I wanted to be the center of the conversation. And at school, I always loved to chatter. I remember the teacher telling me, if you didn't talk so much, you'd get on further. And I thought, well, now I spend my whole life talking. But the natural desire it wasn't to gossip. It was just to find out, who were people. And that's my passion, is to help people not get stuck in difficult conversations. I talk about real synergy, and I'm very passionate about this now that we're in this pandemic world and we have got a lot of chaos. Is why do we get stuck? Why do we not tell our truth when in fact being in a lovely conversation is enhancing and building our immunity? And we need that. But a lot of people find it difficult just to talk. And I remember an occasion when my son was having a challenge, how to talk to the opposite sex, you know. And I said, well, you've got to be interesting, but you've got to be interested. But when you're interested, don't forget what your interest. So, for instance, if you pick a topic like music, and you find out what she's engaged with music, you can either like it or not like it, but you can start a conversation because you like music. So I see the simplicity of life, Mohammed, and I'm really frustrated at the moment when we have such polar opposites arguing about things that are never going to be resolved if you don't get into a space of sharing and contribution. So my goal is to help people help themselves. And if that's in business, it's adapted to the business of today. And every time they find that right space and they learn about themselves, they will also take that home. So my work does actually spread into the home, but in a business context. I work with business professionals, either entrepreneurs or career professionals. And I'm fascinated, absolutely fascinated, as to why, if half the world is female, we're not working the world together. Right. And so one of the things I want to be really clear about is I adore women and I want my sisterhood to really come to the fore, but it's not to take over the world, it's to share it. And I really honor my brothers and men like yourself who really see the value in the synergy, in the circular engagement, the embracing each other. But we've got a lot to learn because I think people don't value the differences. And that's my passion, is at a sort of a one-to-one level, is literally showing people who they are in the mirror. And I will come into this, but you know, I trained as an image consultant, so I learned a lot when I literally helped my clients look in the mirror. And I really am passionate about harmony. And my biggest sort of hashtag is World Harmony, which is a huge vision, but I'm going to go for it.
Pauline, you get me so excited, and honestly, almost had me teary-eyed because where I sit, I recognize the need for us to sit together. And the table where we break bread has to be, you know, bread that we share with people at that table. And I'm all about diversity and inclusion. And that's one of the reasons this podcast is transforming me and transforming the people that share their ideas, but also transforming the listeners, because the world needs to transform. And the curiosity that you bring, and that's what every time you were sharing stories and the reason you like to talk, I kept thinking curiosity, the curiosity you bring, but it's also from a place of plenty. The advice that you were giving your son about to be interested and interesting, because when we come as partners, when we come as equals, when we come as allies to each other's visions, even when those visions may be polar extreme, like we're seeing now, but it's finding the common ground so that we can have those conversations. And I've had those conversations with you in various salons that we've attended, thanks to the people like Dennis and Mike and right. And now more than ever, virtually, you know, once COVID started, we were all afraid how the world was going to adapt, but we adapted. We adapted by saying we had to adapt. We needed to come together, and we found these platforms, and we're speaking together and listening. And I want to go there right now because, you know, when you bring up the subject about sharing, when you bring up, you know, to your relationship with sisterhood and men, and I think that's such an important relationship, because what I'm sitting on the other end of the table from you, and what I find myself doing here, and it wasn't intentional when I started, but it was something I started discovering, is that I wanted to send out a message to my brothers in humanity to say, you know, a lot of us find ourselves in positions of power where we're not sharing that with each other of the same gender, and B, with the other gender. And it's always the other gender, right? We refer to it, right? But it's, you know, we complement each other. We are, you know, like a fancy dress over skin. And I think gender can really come together to provide that image so that we can be the mirror for each other. And you do work where you bring men and women, two genders, equally to the table. Can you tell me about that? Because we need that today. If men are going to share leadership, it's not because women have the right to leadership. It's because I think for too long, we've held on to positions of power wrongfully. And it's only time now to be more inclusive. How are you helping that?
Well, it is timing. They would say there's a perfect time in everything. The last 30 years, I've been sort of observing what's been happening in the women empowerment field, and women in the boardroom and this and this and this and this. And I looked at it and I kept on thinking, there's something that we're not doing. There's something that we're missing. And maybe COVID has brought that, because COVID has changed the structure of how we're working. But it's more than that. It's actually saying, okay, the past was the past. Men created business the way it is, right from agricultural manufacturing. I hope everybody listening knows the history. And so I'm not damning anybody male who's created the world we have, but the world has changed, and it's been changing since 2000 dramatically, with technology, with the ability to be digital, with online, with social media, but also the number of women who want to be in business and who are extremely good at business and have a desire to do that, as well as be maternal and nurturing and raise a family and look after their women have a different life trajectory to men. And yes, men can be house fathers or whatever. We've got all these examples, but we need to have a conversation about things have changed. We are exactly what you said, complementary. And how often are we not complementary and not complementary? We don't give enough gratitude and honor to different qualities that women now bring into work. And I talk about life at work, because now we're into COVID and we're into Zoom and we're into online. Life has come into home. Life at work has come home and into the office. It's not separate. I was reading something this morning about, CEOs who've been fast-paced, pivoting, and then their marriage has disappeared in the last 9 months because they forgot that was part of their life. Women, and this is not a critique of men, but women have always known that life is part of us, because we are circular, we're nurturers. And I think one of the keys, Mohammed, is to understand that we're sharing a different table. We're not sharing the male table or the female table. We're sharing a conjoined table. So I talk about two different operating patterns coming together, like having a PC and a Mac. They sit round the table. So all the characters sit round the table. We don't yet know, A, who the characters are really, and B, we haven't often let go of the past, which says, oh yeah, that emotional stuff is, it's kind of useful, but I'm into crisis, so, patch the table, I need to go and do this. I talk about a new narrative, and I mean this very seriously, that we need to not lose our own identity, but understand the narrative is valuable, and it's creative, and it's feminine, and it's masculine, it's male, and it's female, and it's all the other diversities. So it's sexual orientation, it's age, gender, generation, color, all of those stuff coming. We can't tackle those conversations unless we know who's around the table. And I think, curiously, COVID has given us this huge opportunity to address things differently. But it takes a pioneering mindset, because unfortunately there are a lot of people who say, yeah, but this is the only thing I know. I'm on the Titanic and I know it's a ship, and I'm going to stay on the Titanic because I don't believe it's going to sink. Oh, it's sinking.
Too late.
Too late to have the conversation. What this pause has done for us is that we've had time to have the conversations. And although there is a sense of urgency, and I'm not denying that, we need to really address this human element and factor in the gender dynamics, as I call it. So it's not just gender, but it's the dynamics between us all. It might be between a group of men, it might be in a group of women, it might be in men and women, it may be in a Muslim faith or a Christian faith, or it might be baby boomers, or it might be millennials, or it might be a mixture. But what is the topic, and how are you creating the safe space in which to seed something different and not go too fast into, okay, well, we'll do that. Because this is totally new territory. This is like a farmer seeding a field with a new magic seed that he's never had before. And he doesn't even have an instruction manual. But he knows that if he harvests it too quickly, it won't come to any fruition.
So we're creating a new sort of beanstalk.
Well, yes, and it's not to become all the same. And I think this is the thing that possibly many people are challenged with. And sometimes men are, because men are, are very straight line, yes, no, let's get action. Whereas women will sit forever around the campfire feeding the kids. So, there's pluses and minuses on both sides. But it's not us all being the same. It's actually really, really valuing our differences. And I would say it's a metaphor like a cake. If you're going to make a cake, you want the right ingredients. And a sponge cake is different to a fruit cake. But it won't rise unless you put all the right ingredients and you have the temperature right in the oven and you do all the right things. So we're creating a new cake that's never been here before. And one of our greatest examples of what we can really align to is nature, because nature has a canny way of getting things right. Even in a disaster, even in fires and earthquakes, the earth eventually gets its act together. And I have total belief in the human world, the human globe, the human population, that we can do this. But not everybody is as enlightened in wanting to have these conversations. The conversations are available, but I think we've got some barriers to get through. Would you agree?
It's amazing. You're right. The answers are before us, because we know the earth is so resilient that it bounces back. If we were not to be here within 40 or 50 or 80 years, the earth would, if we destroyed the earth would come back. And in a sense, this pandemic is the earth speaking to us in whispers. In whispers, people are reacting to COVID like this is a life-changing event. This is one small virus that has toppled our paradigms. But just one small invisible virus, invisible to the eye, that is having such an impact. But if the earth were to unleash its anger at us for not respecting its sanctity, then I think, the earth can do without us, but we can't do without the earth. So I love the way you bring nature into it, because we're not nurturing nature enough. And to the point that you bring earlier, I love being proven wrong, and I've been proven wrong on almost every podcast interview that I've been on, and that's part of my learning journey. Is I want to learn, and it's okay if I'm wrong. And in one of the interviews, my guest explained to me, because I was saying, I'm in touch with my feminine side, and I know I'm leading you here because I know you talk about this at length. This is your study and your passion, and you set up these paradigms where it's not about it's not about our feminine side or our masculine side, and I'm going to let you explain better than I can, because we are a lot more holistic than the nuance that I'm suggesting of, feminine, masculine, right? But maybe you can share with the listeners what you've been discovering.
Absolutely. What I discovered, and we were a very good complementary match today, because you're a man, but you have and when I say a feminine energy, it's this intuitive energy. I'm a woman, but I've got a distinctive, logical, masculine energy, and I always have had. And that's where I started my quest, because as a teenager, I would rather have been, going outside and climbing up trees and then doing sort of pretty things. And I'd look at my sister and my sisters at school, my real sister, I have one sister, and think, I want to be with the boys, but not because I wanted to chat the boys up, because I felt more in tune with them. I have two brothers, and one is what I would call a much more masculine guy, and the other is a more feminine, intuitive guy like you. But I didn't realize that at the time. But I think we always do what we know best. And this is one of the things I want everybody to understand. You've got natural gifts and you need to honor them. My natural gift was that I kind of loved shapes and understand how shapes and spaces came together. So I became a very good dressmaker when I was a kid. My mum taught me, and I looked at the fabric, I go, okay, there's a piece there, and that goes together, and then it's round. So when I started exploring why am I different to other women, or am I? And I was in the image world. I started observing patterns. And again, that's the sort of logical, mathematical mind is patterns. And I don't mean dress patterns, but there was this pattern that there were women who had the same body structure as me, same face dimensions, who were equally similar in that mathematical. They would tend to be business majors in construction. You know, they were doing things, engineering. And then the women who were softer shaped were in softer professions, and they liked softer things. And that was the emotional, more feminine side. And I had a lot of male clients as well. So I observed this in men as well. And so I started thinking, this is really interesting. I'm definitely a woman, and it wouldn't matter if I was gay or straight, but I'm a woman who loves being in this masculine energy. So isn't that okay? Can't I be myself as opposed to what other women are trying to make me? Mm. And I started drawing this map up. So the map looks at biology, male, female, brain patterns, left, right, mixture. And then this, what I call this energy of masculine and feminine energy, which we all have certain percentages in, but they're not, they're part of our personality, but they're not necessarily part of our biology. So it's like, I always call it like antennae, you know, like I'm a woman, but sometimes with my antenna, I go more to my masculine, and then I might do a little bit that way, but it's then situational, and it's all about how aware I am. So as a gentle-minded, feminine-minded male that I see you as, and I would say that Nelson Mandela fits that profile as well. You're more the philosopher, the thinker, feeler, than the masculine-minded.
I always say I'm a lover, not a fighter.
Yeah, and the masculine-minded man. And we need all of these characters. And this is one of the things that people get very polarized by, thinking that one is bad or one is good. It's not. We need the action man, who is the masculine-minded man. The masculine-minded woman like me, the magician, who offers in the head, but I have this nurturing center. I have 2 children, 2 grandchildren. I love to nurture people, but I might not do it in the same way my feminine female sister does, who's a sovereign. She's much more nurturing of her whole tribe. Now, my belief is the world is asking us to use all of these parts. We're all people, but we're all different, and the parts come together. So if I need somebody to rescue me from a fire, I might be looking for somebody who's very action-orientated and directive and going to take me out of there. If I'm looking for comfort and solace, I'm looking for the feminine energy. You know, if I want to be in a meeting and understand everybody around the table, I need to adjust where they're coming from. So if the chairman of the meeting is in need of action, then I might not get all silly and emotional. I might just address his bullet points and allow the space to hold what he needs at that time, and then encourage him to thank us all for being there. So I think the new leader of today must understand who they are first, and then must understand other people around the table and be able to flow or sideline or encompass or hold what it is they're there to do. Does that make sense?
It makes wonderful sense. I've always approached your explanation from a point of view that didn't bring energy into it. So I talk about energy when I talk about personality styles and so forth, yes. But it was a lot more scripted than the way that you've explained it, being flowy, right? And it's energy that flows and emanates as opposed to one that restricts. But the thing that really resonated with me here, and when you were referring to me, and you did 2 or 3 times about the intuitive feminine, and I'm proud of that, but I'm going to share this with you, and I'll share this with my listeners. We are taught to honor, and we are taught to shame. And you touched the part of me when I was bullied when I was younger, because I was intuitive, because I was more feminine.
Yes.
This isn't about our sexuality or our sexual preferences, but we associate that sort of male with someone who's homosexual or transgender, and again, absolutely there's nothing wrong with that if people have, are born or choose to be that way. I have full respect for people's freedom to choose and to honor what they're born into. But when you recognize and you identify a certain way, which I identified as a straight male, but I was bullied because I was soft-spoken. I always hung out with the girls, and it hurt. And they called me names like Lance Romance, and they made fun of my sexuality and my lack of masculinity. And I was actually very masculine, and probably sometimes too much. So in my marriage and in my parenting style, I was probably too masculine in the sense that I wasn't listening enough. So picking up on the less embracing masculinity, the one that tends to be a little too dominant. But when you said that, and you said it with full respect and honor, the pain that I felt years ago came to the surface again today. And so we teach honor and we teach shame. And regardless of how much I see myself as a very emotionally intelligent person, so in touch with, right? But that shame drew out the pain. So how do we deal with these demons that remain in us? Because you bring many men, and you've asked us to look internally. And when I sat around a table with 20 or so odd men that you've brought to the conversation, and you started talking about the male parts in us and the female parts in us, it just felt normal. Yes. Yet when you just addressed me that way, and I know you did it with full respect, and I was honored in the way that you did, but I allowed myself to feel, and where my feelings were, where they went, was to the hurt and the pain that I felt when I was younger and I was bullied. So I guess I got two questions for you. How do I learn to honor, and how do I learn to listen to that pain and maybe to let it subside once and for all?
I think it's a really, really interesting point. And I can understand that pain. I mean, I had that in reverse, just to share, is that I wasn't bullied, but I was kind of taunted by girls for not being kind of softer and giggly and all that stuff. And and there was those taunts about, and I think, how do I do that? I remember when I was a young mother with my two, I started dressing as I thought mummies should dress. And I always remember this occasion being at the school event with my daughter holding my hand. I had this very pretty dress on, and she said, "Oh, you're so pretty, mummy." And I thought, I feel absolutely ghastly in this, because it just wasn't me. I was trying to be something that I thought this community of women were expecting me to be, and I thought, that's it. I'm not doing that. It's all about ownership, isn't it? And I think the penalties that society have placed on us, which have extended into all the horrible arguments on the sexuality basis, and you're not man enough, or you're not woman enough. I've had women who've cut me out of their life by saying, you're not soft enough. And I'm thinking, I got really upset about that, but now I go, okay, I don't need you. So it's all about understanding yourself, and also understanding your own destiny and what the destiny of the world will be. I don't know whether you've ever done an exercise about writing your own obituary, or you've ever heard of that.
No, I've heard of it, but I haven't.
And I did write it one in 2007. And in fact, some of the things I wrote are starting to come true, but it was going to be for 2050 when I'm 101. But it's a very interesting exercise, because you need to think about yourself and what you want, but also think about what will the world be like, and how will I have influenced the world to be a different place. And being a smiley, happy, go lucky person, that was always the center of my life. And when we're critiqued or bullied or put down, we start really taking it inside. And I think the more sensitive we are, more aware we are, we realize we still get those reactions, but we can snap out of it faster. So you got that, which shows you're really human and you're intuitive and you're emotional. So you honor it, and then you can snap out of it. In the past, you would have stayed in it. Yes. In the past, I would have stayed in it and gone, that's it.
What's wrong with me?
Yeah.
I'm not enough.
Now that's a wonderful statement. What you think of me is none of my business. And I remember hearing that and thinking, that's really interesting to get into, because it's not about being selfish. but it is about self-care and self-understanding that we're all here to be part of the whole. And so I'm very much into what I call value creation. It's a simple Buddhist, from a book called Education for Creative Living by a guy called Makiguchi. He's a Japanese educationalist. And what it says is that I must have value for myself, whoever I am, whichever part of the gender spectrum I am, whichever part of the age or gender I am. Then I need to have respect for the relationship with you and me and my mum, me and my daughter, me and my husband, me and clients. And then for the collective. And the collective is not in control of me. I am part of the collective, and the collective enhances me. So value creation comes from what I honor about myself. And I think a lot of people have forgotten to honor who they are, because society has said men shouldn't be crying, women shouldn't be tough. Well, I think we've done with all that. We've had lots of decades of change, and now we're in this huge change of respect humanity. And the one thing I want to do is to respect differences, because yes, we're all human, and we can rise to that higher consciousness level, and we can all be similar, but we're never all the same, because we're unique. We have a unique
fingerprint.
We have I might be a woman of 71 as I am. I'm a grandmother and a mother. I'm a businesswoman. I'm a wife. I have a dog. All these practical things. But I'm different to any other woman who has maybe the same criteria, because our soul and our instinct is who we are.
So unique.
One of the things that's important with the label of being a masculine-minded woman or a feminine-minded man, and recognize that it's feminine-minded man. So it's the energy, masculine-minded woman. It's not a masculine woman or a feminine man. One of the things I really realized, and this is important, is that your energy in the feminine intuitive will come out in a different way to a woman who has that same feminine intuitive energy. My masculine energy will come out in a different way to a man using his masculine energy. So masculine energy and feminine energy, which are in our whole universe, are energies, yin and yang, within us, but they come out differently depending on what the blueprint is. So, if I'm a mathematician or a dancer or whatever, then I'm using my masculine feminine energy in a different way than you will. And I think I don't want to overcomplicate it, because it's really simple. It's being who we want to be. And where society says, no, I don't like that, well, that's their problem. But we have to stand up for who we are, but not stand up and fight, stand up and care. And what occurred to me, when we agree, if we all agree on love or humanity or whatever it is, actually being polarized in your views, you could agree with somebody else because they're polarized, not because of their view, but because they're polarized. I'm just being, I'm into equations. So people go, well, I'm right and you're wrong. And then the other one goes, well, I'm right, you're wrong. Oh, well, so we agree. We don't agree on content, but we agree on our ridiculous stance of polarization.
Right. And do you believe that's why we go into our extremes?
Well, the nature of our extremes comes when we're stressed. So one of the things I study with my map and with clients is when they're umming and ahhing and say, oh, I don't know quite where I am on that spectrum. I say, well, what do you do under stress? Because when we're under stress, I would say we go to our corner. So, do you go into fight or flight? So men often go fight or flight, and women tend to befriend, but we can all do fight and flight. When I go into my stress corner, I go, oh, up the world, I'll go and do it myself. Don't need anybody. It's very masculine, that. It's like, whereas when you're under stress, you might retract first to go and think about it and be more philosophical and decide how you're going to come out of it. The masculine-minded man is going to be definitely, he could be rather aggressive in his stress because he wants action and he's not getting it. And the feminine female will go into stress because she's not holding on to her territory, she might get a bit more territorial and protective. So when we spot these stresses, it's not a bad place to be if you're understanding you can come out of it. So this is where enlightenment comes from. We can't always avoid stress, but we can manage it in a different speed if we're aware.
In a different speed, I appreciate that. So do you mean the speed in which we react or respond to it? Or what do you mean by in a different speed?
Well, if I'm aware of my stress and it comes along, when I get stressed, I also get very distracted. So I start doing 10 things at once. The moment at which I recognize it, I can go, okay, that's what I'm doing. Okay, Pauline, now what are you going to do about this? Are you going to have a little paddy and get annoyed, or maybe just go make a cup of coffee or take the dog for a walk, do something different? But your awareness of what stress is doing and not blaming somebody else or shaming anybody. So these negative things that we can do when we're in stress, the more enlightened we are, I think we kind of have that speed in terms of when we recognize it. And then we do something about it, and we have a kind of menu of what we're going to do. So you'll have yours, am I going to take myself out? I'll just go into the garden.
How'd you know?
Yeah, well, I do. But and what's interesting, and this is a very good point, is when you know your own stress, you can then map it out on the map, on my gender map, but also any behavioral map. I learned this years ago. So it's a very quick clue. Somebody is stressed because they need action. The worst thing you can say to them is, oh, for goodness sake, stop doing that. The best thing to say is, I recognize that you need action and you're quite angry about that at the moment. Because what you do then is you pause them. So if you were stressed and I'd say, oh, don't be silly, come out and play. I'd say, hey, I need you need time out. I'll let you do that. How long do you need? And
so that's the mirror that's speaking to us. When you mentioned earlier about becoming the mirror, we need to identify by acknowledging what the person needs.
Yes. So you understand your own, and then you understand those other corners. So if I'm distracted and I'm doing 10 things at once, if somebody comes in and says, you really need to get more order in this place, I'm going, because I know it's true. And I'm going, I don't need you to tell me that. But if somebody is very orderly and I go in and say, oh, come on, have a little mess, that's also just, so we're feeding into where their corner is and then inviting them to come out. And when we come out, we come into the space of understanding the plus side of it. So the plus side of my versatility, or the plus side of action, or the plus side of philosophy and thinking about things, or the plus side of looking after people, that's what's on the table. And that's where the magical conversation comes. And that's where the cake mix of business now, when everybody's talking about this, it's all about people and not just profit. There's still a way to go to learn how to balance that together and how the synergy works, because we need to have an awareness of who's in the room, who's around the table. So if I'm with you, I can go, oh, yes, Mohammed, I know that you're really good at that. That's great. And you need space to do it. Me, I like to do 10 things at once, but I'll try and do 3, and we have this conversation about our advantages, which add to the whole.
Well, it takes a lot more work to lean in and care. And it goes back to what you were saying earlier about that curiosity. We get curious because we care. We want to lean in. It's a lot easier to make an assumption and to tell somebody, calm down. You need more order in your life. Oh, really? Like, I didn't know that, to your point, right? Yeah. But it takes a lot more work for us to recognize that the person is actually reacting in that way, and they may be aware of it. And if they're not, then our goal when we care is to become more aware of their needs. The platinum rule, treat people like they wish to be treated. And
I agree. And one of the things I think is important is that if everybody's got different natural gifts, let's find out what they are. It's not about their credentials at university. Right. It's whether or not do you know in the room who's the one who does like doing detail? I want to know her or him.
What a way to write our new bio or our new resume. I think about LinkedIn and we talk about our credentials, but we don't, you're giving me ideas, by the way, but we don't talk about what really matters is, what do I bring to the table? What ingredient do I bring to the cake that is going to help it rise and take shape and be better tasting, right?
Yes.
It's really insightful. And I wouldn't expect any less from you, by the way. But this is where
Well,
I ask so go ahead.
Well, I think the other thing we can add in there is that, and that you said it, don't make assumptions. Don't try and control somebody else. It's a bit that thing about being interesting and interested. You've got to put your goods on the table of abundance. Otherwise, people don't know what they are. They might suss them out, but say, "Oh, well, I really love, I love being the ambassador of magical conversations. Put me on a podcast anytime. Let me host something." I love inventing things. I love creating things. I love putting people together. I'm not good at detail. I do it because I have to, but it's the one thing that stresses me out. So somebody else at the table says, "I love doing detail. I love what you're doing and I will do your detail." And I go, "That's great." It's like, I'll cook and you wash up, but sometimes we go, "You ought to do this," or, "I'm going to tell you how to do something."
Right.
Always ask permission. I think there are a lot of people who say, "Oh, I've just read this really good book and you really must read it because it's going to change your life." And I'm always going, why not just say, "I read this really good book. You might like it."
Right. Well, that comes down to what I believe leadership is about. It's easier to tell people what to do. It takes more care to empower and enable people to do what they do best. So if you let people weigh in, they'll buy in. And if you know what contribution, what strength somebody will bring to the equation, then you allow them to exercise that capability, because as a leader, you're inherently going to benefit from that expertise that they bring a lot more than if you ask them to do something that they're not that good at. So you set people up for failure because you tell people what to do. It's the autocratic do as I do, do as I say, not as I do, right? I guess, where I want to go with this, and this is where I ask my guest the unfiltered thought of the week. It's where I ask you, what can we do differently to become better humans or better leaders? But I'm going to put a bit of a twist on this. I'm going to ask you, because you're such a wonderful magician and mirror for the nuances that help us understand ourselves better. So that awareness and awareness of others. A lot of time we find ourselves in predicament. Let's say we're in a conflict with someone. The easier approach is to lash out and insult and to say the things that hurt and the things that we want to say. I want to say these to get them off my chest. It's going to make me feel better in the moment, certainly not later, but it's going to make me feel better. I know the things that I want to say are the embracing, loving, put my arms around, the accepting, the acknowledging, acknowledging that even when that person may be wrong, the things that I need to engage in are the things that are in their best interest. As a father, as a partner, as a leader at work, as a coach, wherever I show up, I struggle, and I'm sure some of the listeners will struggle in the same way. The easier place to go to is the faster. It's easier to insult and lash out. And it takes a lot more courage to take time to care. What can you tell us for these impulsive people who want to lash out? What can we do to do better, to learn to care better?
I do feel that you have to examine your baseline mantras of the day. If you have a mantra that says, "Yeah, I'm going to lash out because that makes me feel good," then that, to my mind, is toxic. Do I want to be in your company? No, I don't. So if that happens in my company and I feel that space and energy, I will tend to just go, "Oh, okay," and I'll walk away. And I might be angry, but I don't want to get into a fight. I want them to listen. So I might stop and say, "Do you have time to listen to me?" And if they rant on, I'll go, "Okay, another time." Because in that confidence, we show our our status. So we have to work out what our core mantras are. You know, I recently came across one with one of my colleagues that I'm working with. He said it's about listening generously. And I loved that. I thought that's really good. And my belief in the goodness of all people. And another one I had from a friend in Australia, which was he doesn't believe anybody sets out to make a bad decision. And these are the baselines of my positivity, and I've developed them over my life. So if you want to be violent and you want to be angry and you choose to be, I don't choose to be with you. I don't choose to solve the issue by being what you are. But I might say, I recognize you're angry. And I might state my case in a very calm way, you know, I don't see the world like that. If they then ran to rave again, I would just leave. I'd say, I'll leave. I'm still there if you want me. But you've got to be, this is the whole thing about valuing yourself. And I always adored, my mum died when she was 93 and a half. She was amazing. And she was what I call very selfless, but she was also selfish. And it was a very healthy balance. She was very selfless in that she would very be giving and loved us around, but she was selfish and said, I do really expect you to come and visit me regularly. You know, and we loved being there. She wasn't a moaner. So she was always gracious and really just got tired of life and kind of chose to die. I don't mean suicide. She just literally, I think she decided that enough was enough. Her husband, my father, had died 8 years beforehand, and her mother had died at 99 and a half. And she was 93 and a half. I think she thought, yes, I need to pop off now. So I really admired her. And she was always put her makeup on. She always looked good, even in her sitting in her chair. She always cared about herself enough to want to be with you. So I think that's it. We need a baseline mantra about who am I? What are my natural gifts? What gender dynamic style am I? You know, what makes me tick, and how much do I share with other people? Interested. Where are the connections? And we can always find a connection, I believe. I've studied that so much. You want to find the connection. And once you do, it's your belief about human beings.
Do I believe human people?
Oh, do I believe in the goodness of people? Even when somebody's having a bit of a rant, I mean, that's when it's difficult. I don't understand why there's so much violence in the world, but I know it's there. So I meditate and pray that we can get past that to world harmony. And it's interesting because a lot of people talk about world peace, but I think if we had world harmony, we would have peace. If we had world harmony, we'd have lots of conversations, and we would be able to deal with the issues that need dealing with. You know, the trees all grow in the forest. They don't fight with each other. They might get tangled up sometimes.
But they find a way to still push through and get the light that they need.
There's space for all of us. And I think what we're doing at the moment is people love being in this polar opposite argument because they feel it fulfills them. Well, it doesn't fulfill me. So my advice to people is to, again, find out what they do naturally. I believe we're all born with something natural. Like I was born with this silly maths bit and ability to talk and to draw. You know, it was something I could do. My husband's a born musician. He just knew when he saw a keyboard how to work it. There'll be natural things that you do. Everybody does natural things. But we've had an education system that drowns that and says, no, don't do that, do this, because you don't know that yet. And I just tell you a quick story. There was an interview I was doing with, it was a man, it was in a police unit in London that I was working with, and we're using a profiling tool. And it was about what are your good interests and what you do well. And he said, are you telling me that I should do what I do well? I said, yeah. He said, well, that's different around here because they expect you to be omnicompetent. So what the business was, the police force would say, okay, you can do that and that, but you can't do that, that, and that. So go off and do a course and learn how to do all the things that you don't do naturally. And it was such a revelation to him. It was, and I love this word, we are expected to be omnicompetent. And I think some leaders, CEOs need to understand is they don't need to do it all. They just need to engage people value what's around them,
Right.
find out what the elements to make their cake, and just talk to people and find that space of commonality.
And whether we are at odds or whether we are agreeing, understanding our own mantras, but also the mantras of others is going to
Yes.
help us show up so that we can create those commonalities or at least find them. And I think, as leaders, we forget, we take on the responsibility that we need to shoulder the full responsibility and become omnicompetent. And that's onerous. It's not possible. And right, it's setting ourselves up for failure.
It is. And I mean, they say that burnout is listed, as one of the top diseases. I mean, it's not a disease, but, so many people are burnout, which leads to everything else. It leads to breakdowns, divorces, stress, mental health. And then the kids, we
everyone suffers.
Yeah.
And you mentioned this is what you're hearing now during COVID is the burnout with CEOs because they're not able to define their boundaries, right? So I think it, definitely come from that place where you know your mantra, but know the mantras of others, because it'll help you realize where you will, where you can bring the biggest impact and where you allow others to step in and sit at the table to bring their impact, because doing it all on our own is never going, to your point, the trees all growing together, and the best way to make a cake is to add the right ingredients. And it's not about just one thing. It's not just the flour, it's not just the baking powder. We need everyone to be able to be present, to sit at the table, and to make sure that the table is not constructed by our own hands, but by the hands of others who decide to sit at the table with us. And I want to thank you today for sitting at this virtual table with me and enlightening me with your grace and your magic. And I look forward to continued collaboration with you. Thank you so much for being my unfiltered guest today, Pauline. Blessings.
Thank you.
All the best. Thank you. Thank you for listening to Unfiltered, the show about authentic leadership and personal growth. Like what you heard? Click subscribe, share it, and tell a friend about it. And don't forget to leave a rating.